Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. So pursuant to the order of reference of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, the committee resumes consideration of Bill C-21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments, firearms. Today, the committee starts clause-by-clause consideration. I'll now welcome the officials who are here with us this afternoon. They are available for questions regarding the bill, but will not deliver any opening statements. So from the Department of Justice, we have Marianne Brees, Counsel, Public Safety, Canada Legal Services. We have Paula Clark, Counsel, Criminal Law Policy Section. We have Phaedra Glushek, I apologize, Counsel, Criminal Law Policy Section. And from the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, we have Rachel Mainville-Dale, Acting Director General Firearms Policy. And I thank you for joining us today. And I will now provide some guidance on the clause-by-clause consideration process for Bill C-21. Actually, what I'm going to do here is, I believe the clerk has distributed a document to everyone, kind of giving the outline of how to proceed. We will start with clause 0.1. And we will go forward but not backwards, typically, right? Does anybody have any questions regarding the clause-by-clause consideration of this bill? And if, I'll recognize Raquel in just a minute. We also have our legislative clerks here to guide us along our way, as well as our regular clerk, who is keeping an eye on us as well. So, Ms. Dancho, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciated very much the sort of one-pager you provided to us. I believe it was today. I just want to confirm what a few of the things meant. As you noted in here, a few of us are new to this process. This is, for example, the first time that I'm going clause by clause for a bill, so I appreciated your mention that we will go through this process sort of deliberately so that everyone understands what we're doing. I did want to just clarify a few things. You mentioned in the second paragraph here that if you said that the chair may call upon to rule amendments inadmissible if they go against the principle of the bill or beyond the scope of the bill. You also go on to say, or if they offend the financial prerogative of the Crown. Can you just provide a little bit more insight into like what that might look like, particularly if it offends the financial prerogative of the Crown? So is that saying that if there's any amendment or anything like that that brings in a financial component, that it's out of order?
Actually, that one in particular, I believe it's block 26 or 25, which requests that the Crown institute a repurchase plan, and that requires a charge against the Treasury, and it requires a royal recommendation. So we as a committee aren't empowered to do that, right? And in general, if a change is not within the spirit and scope of the bill, it would be out of order as well. That is that will be determined on an amendment by amendment basis, right? Okay. Any further questions? Okay. Well, let's get into it. So the chair calls new clause 0.1. So the first amendment we have there is G1. Go ahead.
One more question as well. It's about one of the amendments, just now that you've clarified that for me. One of the amendments are two of them actually. A little bit concerned about the scope of them, in particular G4 and G46, I want to say. We feel that they're quite significant changes, which they are. I think that's factual. But we're wondering if, since it's quite soon up, I think that's 5th or 6th amendment that we would be going through. So assuming we'd be getting there quite quickly. Wondering, given the substantial change that they're proposing, if the government is able to provide some more information, if we can perhaps park those amendments to next week, and then we can revisit them once the government has provided more information. In particular, for example, G4, which in essence proposes a ban on nearly all semi-automatic rifles and shotguns. Mr.
Point
Chair.
of order, Chair? Yeah. G4 hasn't even been moved yet, so should we not be going in order of, don't they have to be moved to be discussed?
We can certainly deal with some of the principles in place. So yes, when we get to G4, it has to be ruled in or out of as admissible or not. We can't, we can defer dealing with a specific clause of C21. We can stand it and then come back to it, but we can't do that, I understand, with amendments. Mm-hmm. So the amendments change things in the order.
So just, sorry, point of order, Chair?
I have a follow-up question.
Finish.
Thank you. But what I'm asking, though, if it is moved, we can't park it to later. So that's why I'm bringing this up now before it is moved. And again, that amendment would ban all semi-automatic, almost all semi-automatic shotguns and rifles. So we're asking for if the government can provide a little bit more information so we can better understand the impact of this before it is moved, and then we can talk about it in more detail.
When that time comes, on your point of order?
Yes, Chair. My understanding was that amendments were confidential until moved, so we shouldn't even be having this conversation until they're moved, because each amendment is confidential. So this is not a conversation that we have before any amendment is actually moved on the floor, is it not?
Confidentiality, that's probably correct. However, I think we're kind of in the throes of it anyways. Ms. Dancho, then Mr. Motz.
Again, there are a number of issues with a number of the clauses introduced. I believe that I can speak about them if I'm not reading the entire amendment into record right now. Can I not speak about them what they're about before they're introduced?
We will deal with amendments in order, right?
Okay, well, what I am asking is that amendment G4 is going to require significant discussion. And so rather than hold up all of the amendments that come after that, what I am proposing that the committee, if the committee agrees, that we, if I can ask the information we would like before we consider G4, that we can park that until, say, Tuesday next week when the government has a chance to give us all of the semi-automatic rifles and shotguns that would be banned by that amendment. If they can provide that so that we can consider that more fully so that we're not holding up all of the other amendments, because, again, it's a very substantial change. So, again, we can get into that today and hold up all the other ones, or we can get more information and discuss it more fully informed.
I'll ask the legislative clerk. We can't defer an amendment like that, can we, or can we? If you can give me guidance on that. Yeah, sure. You can speak to it. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. When a debate has started on an amendment, you can certainly stand it and being studied later, but you cannot just stand one amendment. You would have to stand the whole clause and all the amendments that are linked to that clause as well. So in your example, would be the whole clause 1 that would be studied at the end, or whenever you feel like you have the answers you needed.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Motz first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. In line with Ms. Dancho's comments, your statement on our document that you gave on the consideration for clause by clause says the following, that in addition to having a properly drafted in a legal sense, amendments must also be procedurally admissible. The chair may be called upon to rule amendments inadmissible if they go against the principle of the bill or beyond the scope of the bill, both of which were adopted by the House when it agreed to the bill at second reading, or if they offend the financial prerogative of the Crown. I would submit, Chair, that under the second reading of this particular bill, nothing in G4 or the other one that was mentioned, and it slips my mind at the moment, were ever talked about as being part of Bill C-21. As a result of that, let me finish. As a result of that, Chair, I would suggest that, we need to then maybe hold up all of Clause 1, if that's part of it, until we get a proper ruling on whether that's admissible moving forward, and whether this is a different scope than what the bill actually laid out in C-21 when it was presented to the House in the
Right.
first place.
So that's, so we're not going to deal with C4 until we get to or G4 until we get to G4. We're going to take these amendments in order.
But based on what the clerk just said, sir, based on what the clerk just said, we can't take G4 out of Clause 1 unless we hold and suspend all of Clause 1. Did I understand you correctly, sir?
Stand the clause, whether or not we deal with
point of
partial,
order. Sure.
deal with the amendments in partiality.
Point of order?
Mr. McGregor.
Yeah, just quickly, we're not at clause 1 yet, we're still dealing with a new clause 0.1, so
Yeah.
that's not yet.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to clarify.
Right.
Fair
So
enough.
let's let that go through.
Thank you. So as to the process, then it'll be up to the chair to decide whether it's admissible or not. And of course, if the chair decides it's admissible and you disagree, you're able to challenge the chair, and then it goes to the committee for a vote. Okay.
Yeah. So just to your point, so what if we're going through Clause 1 and we don't vote on the final clause, and then we move on to Clause 2, 3, can we not come back to Clause 1? Like, is there not, or can we not talk about Clause 1 at all until we're ready to talk about all the amendments? Is my question. Just so I'm clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once the clause is adopted, all the amendments being dealt with and the clause is adopted, amended or not, the committee can always come back to that clause, but you would need unanimous consent to do that. Now, if you want to stand the clause, that is, to put the clause at a later time, you can also do that by UC or by moving a motion for that purpose.
Okay, so just to be clear, if we have any issue with any amendment at any clause that we don't want to deal with right now, I'm proposing we deal with it later, we'd have to deal with the whole clause and all of its amendments later. Understood. Thank you.
Okay. Shall we carry on? Okay. So we are at new clause 0.1. And under this clause, we have amendment G1, which I believe is in the name of Mr. Chang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move Amendment G1. This amendment shows our intention on this committee to further amend the criminal code. It will simply include the text amendments to the Act, which was not included in the original text of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this amendment?
So can it just be explained exactly sort of, I'm not clear what this does. It seems fine, but is it just sort of like a semantics issue that it addresses?
Yeah, I think it just adds a heading to
Okay.
the bill. Right? So any further discussion? All in favor of this amendment? Opposed? On division? Carried on division? So then we go to Amendment G2. This, I believe, is Mr. Nur Mohammed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a new coordinating clause, which is added before line 1 on page 1. Amendment creates the new clause 01. Amendment updates section 2.1 of the criminal code to amend the further definitions of a firearm to include a firearm part. Coordinating amendments needed based on the new definition of the firearm part, which we are adding to S.184.1 of the code in Amendment G4.
Asher.
So a couple of concerns. My understanding, and please correct me, I guess I'm asking for clarification first. This introduces, the only thing differently, it was all underlined, so I'm assuming the only new thing that we were able, it was firearm part. Is that the new singular part?
Correct.
Which also, there's a number of amendments that have been provided that add that singular thing. For some reason, everything has been underlined in most of
I
those
think it's-
amendments, but
Yeah, I think it's because they're taking one section out and putting
Okay.
the entire thing in. But yeah.
firearm part is the only new part. Okay, thank you for the clarification. And then my question is, I recognize there's an amendment that defines what that means, but it has not been passed yet.
Correct.
And my concern is that not necessarily opposed to adding this, but I don't feel that we've done substantial study on there's no definition as of right now, although it is proposed later may be adopted. I'm not clear if, as of right now, there's no definition. And I don't know if the definition that is yet to be adopted, but is proposed in your amendments, would be an accurate one. I'm not a firearms expert enough to rule on that. So I'm not clear what the impact of this will be, in particular, if any incoming definition of firearm part is not fulsome or is too extensive. Is there a possibility that we may be criminalizing firearms owners who have, gun holsters or gun cleaning tools or the like? So I'm just, again, not a firearms expert, but concerned about the broader implications of this, and that we did not have extensive testimony at committee to make the case that this is needed, or to help us define what would be the best definition for firearm part.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With reference to Ms. Dancho's comment, this really speaks to the testimony that we had related to ghost guns from a variety of different policing forces, and this speaks to the elements that were discussed. So trigger assemblies, slides, barrels. This is not meant to deal with cleaning supplies and other such items. So I think I believe that clarification is there, but this speaks specifically to those elements that could be used to create a gun at home.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I suspected that, so I appreciate that's the rationale behind it. I think we're all concerned about ghost guns, and I think we have, at least I've made it clear that I would like to move forward with efforts to deal with that growing problem. Again, I'm not sure. Again, the definition hasn't been adopted, and we can't exactly talk about it because it's forthcoming, as been mentioned. But there is no definition right now, and there's no guarantee that your definition is going to be adopted. So my concern there, then, we may be putting something in that could be interpreted, perhaps the law clerks can answer. If we've passed this and a definition is not adopted through this process, how would that be defined? Would that have to be defined in the courts? Would that be defined in regulation? If the government's amendment that includes a definition of firearm part. Oh, over to you. Sorry.
Hi, can you hear me well? Hi, yes. So this is a consequential amendment to other motions that are before or will be before. What this does is Section 2.1 sets out words and expressions that, when used for the purposes of the criminal code, have the same meaning as the definition in 84. So if the definition in 84 is struck down, this would have no corresponding definition. It would be in the section without a corresponding definition.
May I ask a
Well, isn't that a little vague? If we're talking every other mention of a device here, ammunition, handgun, imitation firearm, import, everything has a definition around it in the definition section. But we're going to say a firearm part, it could be anything that has no consequence to the use of a firearm, no ability to put public safety at risk. Don't you think we need some? Don't you think we need something that shows that we have that what a part really means?
So yes, there is a definition in Section 2 of firearm part. So there is a definition that correlates to the current offenses and provisions dealing with firearms.
So yeah, for further clarification, what is being discussed, I guess, the point of concern, of course, the definition that Mr. Matsu may be looking for, is in G4. 1.3, where it talks about what the firearm part specifically means a barrel for a firearm, slide for a handgun, any other prescribed part, but does not include a barrel for a firearm, a slide or a handgun if that barrel is then exclusive for use on a firearm that is deemed under subsection 84.3 not to be a firearm. So it's a very specific definition, and it's there for folks to look at.
Just point of order.
Let's do so.
Point of order. I'm new to this too, so just to slow down, Mr. Nur Mohammed, if you're gonna give references, can we just take a second and tell us the number you're on? I just need to go a little slower, thank you, and tell us where you're referencing it from.
And while I still had the
I
floor,
really got to the page in time.
We're kind of all a little bit new to this.
Yeah.
We haven't, some of us, people who've been around for a few years, haven't done a clause by clause for several years now. So We'll hopefully muddle through. Ms. Stancho, please.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, so your G2 mentions firearm part, which you're defining as you've just read, which is your G4, which is a forthcoming amendment, assuming that you're moving. The firearm part that you've read, I think I'll conclude it for you. So firearm part means a barrel for a firearm, a slide for a handgun, and any other prescribed part, but does not include, unless otherwise prescribed, a barrel for a firearm or a slide for a handgun if that barrel or slide is designed exclusively for use on a firearm that is deemed under subsection 84.3 not to be a firearm. So what is, okay, I understood. So, but what is 84.3? Can we be a bit more specific then? Because it's saying it's for some guns, but I think not for other guns, so can we just be a bit more clear?
So 84.3 is criminal code.
Right, so
I don't
which-
have that text in front of me.
I have it right in front of me.
Oh, there you go.
84.3 is for the purposes of 91, 95, 99 to 101, 103 to 107, and 117.03 of this act, the provisions of the Firearm Act, the following weapons are deemed to not be firearms. Any antique firearm, any device that is designed exclusively for signaling, for notifying of distress, for firing blank cartridges, or for firing stud cartridges, explosive-driven rivets, or other industrial projectiles, and intended for by the person, and this is two, intended by the person in possession of it to be used exclusively for the purpose for which it was designed. C, any shooting device that is designed exclusively for the slaughtering of domestic animals, the tranquilization of animals, or the discharging of projectiles with lines attached to them, and intended by the person in possession of it to be used exclusively for the purpose for which it is designed. And D, any other barreled weapon where it is proved that the weapon is not designed or adapted to discharge one, a shot, bullet, or other projectile at a muzzle velocity exceeding 152.4 meters per second, or at a muzzle speed energy exceeding 5.7 joules, or two, a shot, bullet, or other projectile that is designed or adopted to attain a velocity speed exceeding 152.4 meters per second, or an energy exceeding 5.7 joules.
Thank you.
Very informative.
Does that help, Ms. Stancho?
Yes, I believe so. So I appreciate that the definition later on in G4 has been read into the record. So just to be clear, we're voting on now adding this. Again, it's mentioned in, I think, 30 different amendments, or 20, is it 20? So could perhaps our folks here can explain the impact. So let's say someone has, right now, they don't have a PAL, but they have a slide for a handgun. Right now, you don't need a PAL to have one. Now you will. Is that correct? No. Okay. Please elaborate.
The proposed amendment would add a requirement that if a firearm part, which would be a barrel or a slide for a handgun or any other prescribed part, if for that to be transferred to another person, that other person must possess a firearms license. But it would not be an offense to possess the firearm part. It simply applies to the transfer.
Is that for this amendment specifically, or are you talking about all of them that they've brought forward? Because they're inserting firearm part into several areas of the criminal code.
Yes.
So does what you shared with us just now, does that apply to all of them or just this one?
I think we can really only speak to the amendment before us right now.
Oh.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So just so I'm clear, if this passes, if I have a slide for a handgun and I provide it to Mr. Lloyd, but he does not have a PAL, him and I would be violating the criminal code.
The transferor would be violating this requirement because they are not confirming that the other person has a firearms license.
Okay. And would he be in violation because he
He could be in
received it?
possession of property obtained by crime, technically.
Okay. Understood. Thank you.
Mr. Motz.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to confirm the actual numbers, because there is no 2.1 of the criminal code right now. There's a 2, but yeah, there's a 2, but there's not a 2.1. In the most recent criminal code, there is not. So I'm just wondering, because you say, I'm just wondering if the wording is wrong.
So there is an existing 2.1 in the criminal code. It comes right after the main definitions that apply throughout the criminal code. And it's section 2.1, and it's a very short definition that indicates that the terms used in the code, that's okay, in the code are also for the purposes of Part 3 of the criminal code.
Well, my 2023 does not have it in. You have to show me. Because it does not have that in. That's where I was saying it makes no sense.
If you have the Martins 2023, it should be on page 25.
Oh, you're going way back there.
Yeah.
Yeah, back.
I'm going in 84.
Yeah, I know it's on 20, on page 25.
It's in the very beginning of the
On
criminal code
25.
section
Yeah,
2
it's section
Yes.
2.2.
of the criminal code.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Dancho?
if I could just read this in some, because I think so here's my concern about this, that we're elevating firearm part, which I think begets a bigger discussion. Again, as I said, I think we're all interested in addressing the issues of ghost guns, but it does put it in right alongside, for example, ammunition, antique firearm, automatic firearm, cartridge, magazine, crossbow, firearm part now, handgun, imitation firearm, prohibited ammunition, prohibited device, prohibited firearm, prohibited weapon, replica firearm, restricted firearm and restricted weapon, as well as authorization. So I'm just concerned that we're elevating a slide for a handgun up to something that is a prohibited weapon. We're now classifying those the same in this regard?
So it's not about the classification of a word or a part or a barrel. It's a definition of a term that would apply both in Section 2 across the criminal code and in Part 3. So it's a consequential amendment just to add it to the list of defined terms that are found in Section 84.
Right, so that's probably my last comment. But so what I'm saying is if I provided Mr. Lloyd, if he didn't have a PAL, if I provided him a handgun, that would be like a restricted, let's say any prohibited firearm I provided to him. And now because of this, if I also provide him a slide for a handgun, they're equivalent in this regard now.
So what I understand this motion is doing is adding firearm part to 2.1 of the criminal code. And that just adds it to the list of already defined terms in Section 84.
Okay.
So this doesn't have a substantive change in terms of the definition or the firearm part. It's just adding it as a consequential amendment to the motion to 84.
Further discussion? Okay, let us have a vote on G2. Is G2 adopted? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. That brings us to G3, which also I believe is in Mr. Nur Mohammed's name.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This continues the creation of a new clause. 0.1 deals with the terrorism amendments. It will add the term firearm part in the criminal code. One of the things the judge shall consider of recognizance is whether it is desirable or in the interest of public safety to prohibit a person from possessing firearms. It's a new coordinating clause added before line 4 on page 1. Only change we're making to the code is adding the term firearm part. Coordinating amendment is needed based on the new definition of a firearm part, which we're adding to as we just discussed.
Mr. Motz.
I'm just curious, can you go back and say what we've added again? Because with everything covered off and all underlined, it doesn't show us exactly, and I'm trying to find what we actually added.
So it adds the term firearm part.
That's it. So what we're really saying here is that a judge, when he's making an issue under a recognizance, he could add that to to our witnesses. He can add, he can give a recognizance with a condition that a person cannot own or have possession of a firearm part.
Yes.
Even if it's a nothing part, it's got to be a barrel based on this definition. It's got to be a barrel of a firearm.
A barrel or a
which by
slide for a
itself is
handgun.
nothing.
But it's the same as other items that are listed in other prohibition orders, which is a fairly fulsome description of things that cannot be possessed by a person who's entering a terrorist peace bond.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that we're trying to deal with ghost guns, and that we can make a firearm with a 3D printer other than the barrel, right? And we want to prevent the barrel from being used as a ghost gun, but we're going to criminalize administratively people who have no 3D printer, no intention of building a 3D printer, and are building a firearm from a 3D printer, I'm concerned that, you may have an individual who has a barrel of a firearm, and that's going to now become a condition for a judge to consider, and I just find that to be seriously problematic unless we expand that definition and what the intent is really all about. I just don't understand why, if we're saying a barrel that's used for a ghost gun, then that might give people some satisfaction, but I doubt it.
Yeah, hopefully this is helpful. So basically, the most of Mr. Nur Mohammed's amendments are adding the phrase firearm part, and they go on through, like I've highlighted them all. There is an amendment coming up which specifies exceptions, so that if you are the owner of a barrel or a slide for a legitimate purpose, you're not going to be covered by this. So it's coming up, exceptions. It's just we've got to get there and go through the criminal code in order.
Other comment? All in favor of amendment G3, please? I'm sorry, on division? Carried on division. So we go now to block 1, which is my understanding is going to be withdrawn. A point of order, go ahead, on a point of order.
Now that we've amended clause 0.1, that's what we just did, do we now have to have a vote on all of clause 0.1 before we move on to clause 1?
That's a very good point. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those were new amendments that created new clause, the new clause 0.1. So when those amendments are adopted, they create themselves the new clause. There's no need to adopt the whole thing at once. It will be incorporated in the Act altogether at once afterwards. Unlike another clause, let's say clause 1, where you have amendments, then at the end you would have to ask the question, shall clause 1 carry as amended or not?
So because I think I understand.
Yeah, okay. All right, so Ms. Dancho.
Thank you again. So I guess going back to what we talked about, what I was asking at the beginning, if we begin clause 1 now, and if there's any amendment that's going to cause a lot of issues that may delay the progress of the rest of the amendments and the rest of the bill, what we are asking for is we would like to ask for more information on G4. We cannot have a proper debate without fully understanding the impacts. And Mr. Nur Mohammed did provide for us a G4 definition of firearm part, which I appreciate, that it was helpful. But again, G4, I don't know how else to talk about this without saying it, but in essence, it bans most semi-automatic rifles and shotguns. That is incredibly significant, Chair, and will impact hundreds of thousands of hunters. So we need to be clear of what that is. What we would like to ask for is a complete list of the firearms, notably semi-automatic rifles and shotguns, that would be impacted by G4 for us to make a substantive decision on the impact of this. Right now, this has been introduced.
Point of order again, Chair.
And it does not.
It has not been moved.
So my point is, though, maybe the committee might want to consider waiting on clause 1 until, say, Tuesday, when we can get a little bit more information. If I could get out without being interrupted what that information is, perhaps the government could provide it, and then we can have a proper debate on Tuesday about clause 1, because it sounds like we can't open clause 1 unless we're going to talk about all the amendments. And what we're saying is G4 is going to hold up a lot of progress on this bill. So we are asking for a complete list of the firearms impacted by G4. And I can go on with some more information that we would like, but that in particular would be, I think, very beneficial for us to fully understand the impacts of G4 to the hunting community in particular, which is well over 1 million Canadians that likely possess various models of semi-automatic rifles and shotguns, Mr. Chair. So if there's agreement with the committee, I say we park Clause 1 until Tuesday, or this is going to be a bit challenging, I think, to proceed.
Legislative Clerk, do we, if we wish to stand Clause 1, will we do that now by motion, or will we deal with the amendments and stand it at the end?
I know it's better to do it all at once because all the amendments come together.
Okay, so we stand Clause 1 now?
Yeah.
So I believe that is the motion before us is to stand Clause 1. Is that correct? Okay. Mr. Lloyd and then Mr. Moff. Mr. Moff.
Is there a motion on the floor, Chair, to stand Clause 1? I didn't hear one.
Okay, point of order. On a point of order.
Yes, if we were to move this motion, I think, we would want to know if the government would actually provide the information that we're requesting, because there's no point in us standing it and then bringing it back up at Thursday's meeting or next Tuesday's meeting without the information that we're looking for, you know what I mean?
So I'm trying not to get involved in debate, but I do believe there's a comprehensive list in the proposed schedule that is brought in. Mr. Moff, go ahead.
I just want to say any of these amendments that we're going to deal with, we have officials here in the room. If there's any questions to be asked on any amendment that's been put forward, just as we have already done on the 2 that we've had, we have the experts in the room who can answer the questions. So if there's any questions on G4 or G5 or whatever amendment it might be, they're here to answer questions today. So we can move forward, Chair. We're not even at G4. If the Conservatives don't want to bring a motion forward on delaying Clause 1, then we should deal with BQ1, which is the one that's in front of us right now.
Point taken. So I guess, is there a motion to
I guess I
stand
just
Clause 1?
have one follow-up question. Then to Ms. Damoff's point, then do the experts have the list that I've asked for? Have you brought that today of all the models of firearms that would be prohibited under G4?
Yes, I'm just finding the motion number.
So we really need to stick to the amendments in order. If we go all over the map, we'll never get anywhere. So,
Then let them move G4.
pardon me?
Then move G4.
Well, the amendment
Then
now
we can-
before
then we
us
can
is
deal with the
Block 1.
amendments.
So, Monsieur Fortin is withdraw Block 1?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, my intention is not to withdraw it, but if your decision is that it is inadmissible, then obviously then we would, but I would like to present it.
You certainly may present it. It is I merely asked you that because it had been my information that Ms. Michaud was going to withdraw it. But if you wish to move it, you're representing her at this time, so please do so.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I did not receive those instructions from Ms. Michaud, so I will move it, and it is to add a definition of prohibited weapons in the criminal code in order to avoid having manufacturers avoid the restriction on assault weapons. So we think that it is an important definition, and it comes from the testimony that you heard in committee from Police se souvient, among others. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Lloyd, please.
Thank you, Monsieur Fortin. I'm wondering, so under the definition, we're adding a prescribed military-style assault weapon. Is there somewhere later on in this giant package of amendments, is there a definition of what a military-style assault weapon is? Or are we just introducing this term but not prescribing what the term actually means?
Je ne pourrais pas répondre.
I can't really answer that question specifically, but I do not believe that there is a definition other than the one here with regard to it being a prescribed military-style assault weapon. So the government could adopt a regulation that would define what a military-style assault weapon is. That's how things usually proceed for this kind of clause. But as far as I know, there is no amendment that proposes such a regulation, according to what I know.
But, and it's Mr. Mott. Sorry, Mr. Mott was, I should have recognized you earlier. But
Well, that's okay. Thank you very much. You know, Mr. Fortin, I have to agree. I've been waiting for a government definition of what a military-style assault weapon is for many years, ever since they've done this order in council, because there is no such firearm in Canada. None. Prohibited, I mean, what they're trying to say, I believe, is that it's an automatic firearm, a full automatic firearm that has a large capacity magazine. All those were banned already, they're prohibited already in 1977. So if we're going to have firearms that have full auto capacity, prohibited. We're going to have firearms that have a large capacity magazine, already prohibited. So that would be the only thing I can see that would be a military-style assault weapon. If they're talking about a firearm that looks scary, firearms should never be classified by how they look. They should be classified by what they do. And so, I mean, in all due respect, I can't support this because there is no such definition of this type of firearm that exists anywhere in Canada, and hence the great concern Canadians had when the government came out with this term without a definition.
thank you, Mr. Mott. We go to Mr. Mott. Yeah, please.
Chair, and I thank Monsieur Fortin for sitting in on this committee today. We can't support this amendment because we are coming forward with an amendment that's more comprehensive and that would better define what a military-style assault weapon is. So while we are supportive of the concept, I think that our amendment is that we will get to at some point, is more comprehensive and would provide a better definition than this. So appreciate the spirit of where this is coming from and appreciate the work that the bloc is doing on this issue. But we won't be able to support this particular amendment because I also think it would mean that our amendment that's coming up later would not be able to be moved.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this amendment? All in favor? Opposed? Motion is, or the amendment is defeated. This brings us to CPC 1. Madam Dancho.
First, and then I could talk about it. That's how it works.
You can, I don't think you need to read about it, because we all have a copy of it, and it's... I
Okay,
think
well,
part of-
it's short, so, and even if it wasn't. So that Bill C-21 in Clause 1 be amended by replacing line 15 on page 1 with the following. An antique firearm, any such device that is brightly colored on 25% or more of its surface. So the purpose of this, we were trying to find a solution for the airsoft community to keep going, that they will be given a chance to survive, given that this bill, should it pass as it is in its current form, will likely mean the end of airsoft, if not today, then eventually. So we are looking for some sort of common ground, a midway compromise, where perhaps acknowledging that police have challenges with airsoft because they look like real firearms, and therefore when people who are breaking the law have airsoft in their possession, police have to treat them like real guns, and then they may end the life of someone doing criminal activity or shoot them when they had, in essence, a toy gun. And so I recognize that for police, the concern, and I am a very strong supporter of our police services and want to support them in this. So we are trying to figure out a way that we can keep airsoft alive while respecting the needs of police. So that would be, we propose that we put in legislation that they have to brightly color at least 25% of it so that it's more easily identifiable. It's not a perfect solution, Mr. Chair, but it is something as trying to find a midway here. So that is the purpose of this amendment, an effort to support our airsoft community and our police at the same time.
Thanks, Chair. Just for clarity, Clause 1.1 in the bill is not the clause that actually prohibits airsoft. It's just providing a definition of replica. And we won't be able to support it because the 25% colored was actually not something that was supported by the police who testified, nor by, quite frankly, the airsoft community. So we won't be supporting this one.
Mr. McGregor.
Well-intentioned. I think we've all struggled with how to fix airsoft in this bill, but while I won't support this, I think there are plans afoot to fix airsoft later on in Clause 1.
And just to follow up with Ms. Demoff's comments, this was made an effort to support the airsoft community. This bill very much is against the airsoft community. Just to be very clear, this Liberal government bill has been brought forward as an attack on the airsoft community. So we were trying to bring forward an amendment to support the airsoft community. If it doesn't pass, it is what it is, but we are trying to do what we can to support the airsoft community in Canada and to keep it alive and thriving. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor of CPC 1? Opposed? Motion is defeated. Well, that brings us now to G4, which we've heard so much about. And there has been a question raised whether it is in scope. So the amendments put forward here, they add additional definitions to Section 84 of the Code, and they deem certain firearms as prohibited devices. These amendments, in my view, are in scope because they fulfill the broader spirit, the principle of the bill. And it makes further amendments to an act that we're already amending, or to sections of the act that we're already amending. So the decision of the chair is that this motion is, or so this amendment is admissible. Ms. Stancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important, given the considerable impact this will have on hundreds of thousands of Canadians. I'm going to read it, just to be clear of what we're talking about today. So it says that Bill C-21 in Clause 1 be amended by adding, after line 15 on page 1, the
Chair,
following.
Sorry, point of order. This amendment has not been moved yet, so we can't read it into the record.
If you can get to it, then we can debate it.
Yeah, so I'm hoping we can avoid actually reading it into the record.
We will not be able to avoid that, Mr. Chair.
It is part of the record as it stands. Anyway, so it is under Mr. Chang. Mr. Chang, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would now like to move the amendments in G4. These amendment proposes a number of additional definitions to Section 84 Sub 1 of the Criminal Code, including definitions for a prohibition order, firearm parts, semi-automatic, and bore diameter. These amendments will also add subsections to the definition of a prohibited firearm to ensure that moving forward, all new makes and models of firearms that meet this definition are prohibited for sale in Canada. From my personal experience serving as a police officer for many years, I have witnessed firsthand the harms that assault rifles can do to our communities.
Mr. Chang and Mr. Lloyd on a point of order. Please go ahead.
I'm just wondering, now, Chair, you have ruled that it is in scope, but now that it's been being moved in the process, the reason I'm interrupting is once he's done moving it, are we not allowed to debate the scope question at that point? If it's been moved, if he's completed moving it, is the scope question out? Because I did want to bring up a novel point that you didn't, possibly didn't consider when ruling it in scope.
So the decision of the chair to rule it in or out of scope is not debatable, but if you wish to challenge the ruling, you may do so, and that is also not debatable.
But must I do it now, or must I do it before he's finished moving it?
Well, I think probably you should do it now.
Okay. And it's not debatable.
It's not debatable.
I just wanted to maybe bring something to your attention, Mr. Chair. And maybe it's not a debate, but you did say that it would affect the financial prerogative of the Crown.
No, I didn't say that.
Well, in your document email that you sent to us earlier, you said you would rule any amendments out of scope if it offended the financial prerogative of the Crown. That was in the document you sent.
That is
correct?
one of the reasons for not having something admissible.
Correct.
But I don't see that in this
So
bill.
on that basis, Mr. Chair, I would submit that G4, in adding a great number of firearms to the list of government prohibited firearms, would affect the financial impact on the Crown, because the cost of the buyback to buy back these millions of new firearms would be a massive cost to taxpayer. And so I would argue, Mr. Chair, that it's out of the scope of the committee because it does offend the financial. It would require a royal recommendation, and that the committee, it is out of scope because it would have a massive impact on the financial cost to the Crown.
So are you challenging the decision of the chair?
Yes.
Very well. The decision, therefore, is, shall the decision of the chair, the question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? If you vote yes, you support the chair. If you vote no, you disagree with the decision of the chair. So I'll call that vote now. All who are support the sustaining the decision of the chair, please raise your hands.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, but just before we take the vote, so we were not provided really an opportunity to debate this at all. So you ruled on something where I had barely made the case for why this is out of scope. Mr. Lloyd's made a good point. So you're not providing us ample opportunity to say at all. There's a number of other things to consider that this is out of scope. So how can committee members vote if they have not been fully informed of the possible implications of this? I'm just not clear why we weren't provided more time.
Well, the decision of the chair is not debatable. The decision of whether to override the decision of the chair is also not debatable. So Mr. Lloyd has moved to challenge the decision of the chair. So it's before the committee now whether or not that decision be upheld.
Point of order, point of clarification, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Nobody challenged whether this was out of order. You proactively suggested that this could be out of order. And so you made a decision when there was no basis for making that decision because nobody had challenged whether it was in order or not. And so how could you proactively rule that something was in order if nobody had challenged whether it was in order or not at the time?
Well, it's the chair's prerogative to rule each and every amendment in or out of admissible or not.
But you haven't heard all. Point of order. But we haven't not been able to say our piece of whether we feel it's in order or not. So are you going to go through every single one and without us even getting the opportunity as Conservatives, NDP, and Bloc to say why we may feel this is out of order and out of the scope, you're going to just cut off that debate, Mr. Chair? Is that what we're understanding?
It's not a debatable question.
But you, as Mr. Lloyd said, you decided this was in order before we even were provided an opportunity to say why we believe that it isn't. So you're setting now the standard that no one at this committee can argue for any of these amendments that we believe they're not in order. Is that what I'm understanding is happening here? We can't say our piece of why we think this is out of order because you jumped the gun in essence and said that this is in order and I say so. I'm just being clear on what your position is on this. Because there are this many amendments.
Oh, let's back up here. Mr. Chang was moving, which implicitly means that I had considered it in order. Mr. Lloyd expressed a problem with that, and I know that you'd mentioned earlier on that you had concerns about whether or not this was admissible or not. Therefore, I explicitly made a ruling, which is a chair's prerogative to do, that it is in fact in order, in my opinion. That's my prerogative. I understand your perspective. The decision has been challenged by Mr. Lloyd. We have before us a motion to sustain or not the decision of the chair.
Monsieur le Président, peut-être avant qu'on...
Mr. Speaker, before we go any further, I am being told that the interpreters are having a hard time hearing. So it's important to speak closer to the mic, please. So I just wanted to let you know that. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Fortin.
Thank you, Mr. Fortin.
Berger is next, I believe. We seem to be having entered a debate. We'll have a very brief. No? Okay. So we're not going to debate this. It is a matter that has been, the chair has ruled.
You have to hear interventions before you rule. You're like the Speaker of the House here. You have to hear interventions on any matter before the committee. That's what your requirement is. You can't pre-rule something that you believe is in order. You can't. You have to hear why we think it isn't and why the government positions think it is.
Point
And then
of
we
order,
rule.
Chair. A
That's how it
challenge to the
works.
chair is not debatable, and we're entering into debate on this. So we need to vote on whether your decision is sustained or not, and then we can go back to the business of the committee. But this is not debatable, and we need to vote on it.
The fact that you made a ruling that wasn't even able to be made is what the issue is.
There is no issue. The chair has a prerogative
It
to
is
make
an
this
issue.
ruling. The chair has made this ruling. The motion is before the committee to sustain the decision of the chair or not.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I apologize for interrupting you, but just to be clear, you did not hear the arguments of why this is not admissible in this bill from us. You did not allow us that opportunity, and you've made a ruling. You said it is your opinion that it is not, but you have not heard really any perspectives on it, save for one. I just want to make that very clear to the committee members that you did not allow us the opportunity to make our case of why we believe G4, which will impact hundreds of thousands of people, is not admissible to the bill C-21. So just to be clear, your opinion is formed on a lack of evidence from what we would have liked to have brought forward should you have given us that opportunity, but you did not. So just to be clear.
Thank you for your intervention. So we'll proceed with the vote. Shall the decision of the chair be sustained? I think we should do a voice vote on this. Yeah. Sorry, a roll call vote.
Okay, on the question,
Shall the decision of the chair be sustained?
Mr. Chang,
Yes.
Ms. Demoff. Yes. Mr. Nur Mohammed,
Yes.
Mr. Shifki,
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen,
Yes.
Ms. Dancho,
No.
Mr. Lloyd,
No.
Mr. Motz,
No.
Ms. Falk,
No.
Monsieur Fortin,
Oui.
Mr. McGregor.
Okay, so the decision of the chair is sustained. So the motion, the amendment is in order. Mr. Chang was in the process of moving the motion. Please start again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From my personal experience serving as a police officer for many years, I have witnessed firsthand the harms that assault weapons can do to our communities. The government has taken bold action to get these dangerous weapons off the streets. However, we have heard that new makes and models of firearms are continuously created to circumvent the current definition of a prohibited firearms. During the witness testimony, this committee heard from a number of witnesses about the importance of this amendment, including the Canadian Doctors for Protection from Guns, the Coalition for Gun Control, and Police of Civilian. Dr. Najma Ahmed from the Canadian Doctors for Protection from Guns discussed the ongoing use of an assault weapon in violent crime, saying that we must take a more comprehensive approach. She was quoted as saying, "A similar type of gun, the SKS rifle, which is not currently covered by the Ordering Council, was used recently to kill 2 police officers in Ontario. A clear line must be drawn to ban all semi-automatic rifles as part of this legislation." Furthermore, Ms. Wendy Kulkier from the Coalition from Gun Control stated, The second area in which we think the legislation could be strengthened is with respect to the ban on semi-automatic military-style weapons. We think that a definition should be included to make very clear the evergreen requirements for this legislation. We know from the 1995 orders in council that gun manufacturers will circumvent any lists that are provided, so that it's important to have a clear definition, perhaps like those in the California laws, in the legislation along with OIC. This testimony also supports our efforts to ensure that the definition of prohibited firearms is comprehensive and properly addresses the public safety of all Canadians. Given the demonstrated need for these amendments and the related testimony we have heard while questioning witnesses, I hope everyone will support these amendments to create a more comprehensive definition of a prohibited firearm and to improve the public safety of all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We have Ms. Dancho, followed by Mr. Motz, followed by Mr. Lloyd, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, I'm going to read it just so that we're very clear of what it is we're talking about. So Bill C-20, this is the Liberal government's amendment to Bill C-21. It amends Clause 1 by adding the following. 1.1, the definition prohibition order in subsection 84.1 of the Act is replaced by the following. Prohibition order means an order made under this Act or any other Act of Parliament prohibiting a person from possessing any firearm, crossbow, prohibited weapon, prohibited device, firearm part, ammunition, prohibited ammunition, or explosive substance of all things, or all such things, pardon me. 1.2. The definition prohibited firearm in subsection 84.1 of the Act is amended by striking out or at the end of paragraph C and by adding the following after paragraph D. E, a firearm that is capable of discharging a projectile with a muzzle energy exceeding 10,000 joules, other than a firearm designed exclusively for neutralizing explosive devices. F, a firearm with a bore diameter of 20 millimeters or greater, other than a firearm designed exclusively for neutralizing explosive devices. And G, and in particular, Mr. Chair, I would like to follow up my reading of this with some comments about G. G, a firearm that is a rifle or shotgun that is capable of discharging centerfire ammunition in a semi-automatic manner and that is designed to accept a detachable cartridge magazine with a capacity greater than 5 cartridges of the type for which the firearm was originally designed. H, an unlawfully manufactured firearm regardless of the means or method of manufacture. I, a firearm listed in the schedule to this part. 1.3, Section 84.1 of the Act is amended by adding the following in alphabetical order. Firearm part means a barrel for a firearm, a slide for a handgun, and any other prescribed part, but does not include, unless otherwise prescribed, a barrel for a firearm or a slide for a handgun if that barrel or slide is designed exclusively for use on a firearm that is deemed under subsection 84.3 not to be a firearm. 1.4, subsection 84.1 of the Act is amended by adding the following in alphabetical order. Semi-automatic in respect of a firearm means a firearm that is equipped with a mechanism that, following the discharge of a cartridge, automatically operates to complete any part of the reloading cycle necessary to prepare for discharge of the next cartridge. 1.5, Section 84 of the Act is amended by adding the following after subsection 2. For the purposes of paragraph F of the definition prohibited firearm in subsection 1, bore diameter is A. In the case of a smooth bore firearm, the interior diameter of the firearm barrel, measured at its narrowest point forward of the chamber and forcing cone and before the choke and any muzzle attachment. And B, in the case of a rifled firearm, the interior diameter of the firearm barrel, measured at its narrowest point forward of the chamber, throat and free bore, and before the crown and any muzzle attachment. Mr. Chair, I do find that it is important that we are being fully transparent of what this bill does. Just to be very clear, Section G, in essence, bans nearly all semi-automatic rifles and shotguns. Perhaps this is when I conclude my remarks, I would like the experts we have here to provide, I would assume they have it, I would hope they have it, the extensive list of all firearms in Canada that this would fall under this definition G. So again, just to be clear, any center fire semi-automatic long gun that has a detachable magazine would be capable of receiving a magazine with a capacity of 5 or more cartridges. So the way that it's worded seems to be that, only if it fits a magazine that has more than 5 cartridges in it, or bullets, or or what have you, cartridges. But the fact is, if you can fit a magazine in that has 4, that could fit 4, it could also fit 6, 7, 8. Like it's the slot for the magazine. So there may be some semi-automatic rifles and shotguns that are not included in this. But just to be very, very clear, the Liberal government with this amendment is moving to ban almost all semi-automatic shotguns and rifles. So we're talking bird hunters. Bird hunters use semi-automatic shotguns, Mr. Chair. So the Liberal government for 7 years has been saying, no, we respect hunters. We would never come after their firearms. It's not about that. It's about safety of our communities. But with this amendment, there will be well over 1 million, likely more, semi-automatic, perfectly reasonable standard hunting guns that are banned like this. That is what we're debating today. And my colleague, Mr. Lloyd, mentioned the massive financial impact for this. I assume the Liberal government is going to provide, if this passes, the dignity to hunters in rural Quebec, in the Maritimes, in rural Manitoba, in our urban cities, in northern BC, etc. We'll be providing them some dignity and paying them for them. We know that this also impacts the OIC. And this has financial implications in that regard, but you've ruled that it is now, that it's fine, even though there likely will be massive financial implications, possibly in the billions of dollars, because of G and the rest of this amendment. I am quite shocked, and I am shocked that it is in the scope of C21 even without the financial implications. C21 was sold to the public as a ban, sort of a long-term, slow-burn ban, a handgun freeze, so to speak. It also talked about red flags, airsoft. It said nothing about an all-out war on hunters in Canada, which is what this is, Mr. Chair. If you get a group of 10 hunters together, it's likely 40% or half of the firearms they use are semi-automatic shotguns or rifles. Those are very standard hunting tools. Farmers as well, particularly farmers that have issues with wild boars in their communities. We're seeing this increasingly in southern Saskatchewan and Alberta, and they're coming in from the United States. They're extremely dangerous to livestock, to human beings, to dogs. If you are a farmer with this invasive species on your land, wild boars coming in from the United States, you're going to hope that you're going to have a semi-automatic rifle or shotgun as a tool to protect yourself, your livestock, and the other animals you have on your farm. So there was no testimony about this whatsoever. It will impact hundreds of thousands of hunters, Mr. Chair, and farmers who use these as completely legitimate tools. It was not discussed at all or debated. Nothing in here is about an attack on hunters, and yet here we are, Section G. Every promise that's ever been made by the Liberal government that is not going after hunters is thrown out the window completely and utterly. And there was not a single witness we were able to ask about the impact of this, whether it's on safety or whether it's on the impact of our firearm hunting community. This is no longer about sport shooters and their handguns. This is about hunters and farmers who use semi-automatic shotguns to go geese hunting. So I was quite shocked, and we had to do a considerable amount of research in the last few days to understand if we were really seeing this correctly. And I never thought we would. I wanted to believe the Liberal government when they said that they weren't going to attack hunters and farmers and the tools they use, and to say nothing of the Indigenous community who often use semi-automatic rifles to hunt. It's very, very popular, in fact, in the Indigenous community. We had them here. We were not able to consult them on this. So I have a lot to say on this. I just wanted to introduce this off the bat. But I would just to say, Mr. Chair, I was quite shocked that the Liberal government is looking to really attack our hunting community in Canada. I find it very personally insulting, personally an attack on the people I grew up with that are law-abiding citizens who use these as perfectly legitimate tools, who've passed them down for generations, that now if this passes, those will be illegal. And we didn't even have the chance to invite witnesses, to debate this properly, and it's nothing to do with handguns, nothing to do with the handgun freeze. This is an attack on hunters, Mr. Chair, and I'm deeply concerned about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I certainly echo the comments of my colleague, Ms. Dancho. the whole idea behind the premise of C-21, the Liberals told the public, was public safety. It's all about public safety. And when the bill was debated on second reading, to first come to this committee, nowhere did the government have this in any of their conversations. They tried to assure Canadians now for a number of years that their attack on firearms and firearm owners in this country was legitimate and it's only for public safety, which we've all seen and clearly see it's got nothing to do with public safety. And to go back to the point I made earlier, this particular bill, when debated in the House, included none of this. None of this. So, it's brought in at the 11th hour to, because the Liberals knew that if this was to be debated in the Canadian public, which this impacts, it would be shot down and witnesses would come by the dozens that would speak against it. Now, I would challenge Ms. Dancho's comment. This doesn't affect hundreds of thousands. This affects millions of Canadians and millions of firearms. There are millions of Canadians who hunt and sport shoot. And so what I'd like to do for some time is to go to our legislators here in the room and ask some questions. So can you tell me the intent behind, and I'll start with G. G4, item G here, it's mentioned under 1.2G, a firearm that is a rifle or a shotgun that is capable of discharging center-fire ammunition in a semi-automatic manner that is designed to accept a detachable cartridge magazine with a capacity greater than 5 cartridges of the type for which the firearm was originally designed. Okay, so as I read that, growing up with firearms, I say many firearms who are semi-automatic can accept magazines that are different than the five-round mags. We know that 5-round, anything above this in this category is a prohibited device. You can't have a magazine in this category that you're talking about with a magazine greater than 5. So, but are firearms, by their simple design, can a magazine be available that could be brought in that has more than 5? Sure. And does it fit that firearm? Sure it does. That's already a prohibited device as listed into the code already. So why this is there shows me only one thing. Any firearm that is capable of receiving a magazine greater than 5 rounds is now going to be a prohibited device. And please tell me that isn't so. And if the language that you've written here is wrong, then let's change it. Ms. Clark.
You're correct in how you have interpreted the wording of the description that would be added to the definition of.
Right. So in essence, then the Liberals government has tried to backdoor this, and this is not a reflection of you. They've asked you to do something, but they've backdoored something they've said all along, and that is that we are never going to go after the industry, the hunters and farmers that have these type of firearms. And what you in essence have done is you've created a whole class of potential criminal because they have a firearm that has the capability of receiving a magazine that's greater than 5. That's what you're saying? So that by G now we have now created an administrative offense for a gun that's been in existence for decades and decades and decades that has no history of public safety issues, and now we've made millions of Canadians criminals because they now have a firearm. So in reality, as Ms. Dancho's indicated, we're talking if there are 500,000 firearms of just one type in existence, and it's worth $600 on a conservative estimate. Like we're talking conservatively, small c, billions of dollars just on this alone. And I don't understand. First of all, your ruling, Chair, on how this fits with anything. It's like you've got some direction that you've got to try and push this through no matter what. And I tell you, this is absolutely wrong. So this not only affects the firearms that exist now, but it exists any variants that might come out in the future, like the Order in Council did in May of 2020. Like we had a few firearms on that list, and then as the days and weeks and months went on, the Firearms Center have just added more and more and more and more firearms. And now in this act, we see again hundreds and hundreds of firearms added here that make absolutely no sense. I mean, we have to keep going back and remind ourselves, this is about public safety. It's about public safety. That's what C-21, the Liberals tell us it's supposed to be all about. Please tell me, show me the evidence. Mr. Chang brought this motion forward, and I respect his service, and I have 35 years in policing as well. I don't see how anything along that we've talked about in G is going to have any substantive impact on public safety, period. And if we don't impact public safety, what are we wasting our time for? Like, seriously, what are we doing here? Like, this is absolutely ludicrous that we have this sort of,
Mr.
a broad brush.
Mr. Motz, I would encourage you to ask them questions they can answer.
Yeah, I can have commentary before they get to my question. A broad brush approach to confuse those in Canada who think that the Liberals are actually doing something for public safety. If they're doing something for public safety and all the money they've been pouring at this for the last number of years since they've been in power for 7 years, we wouldn't have had 174 additional violent offenses in the last year from the year before of homicides. Like we have a problem in this country, and it isn't the lawful gun owners. This act does nothing but target law-abiding Canadians. Nothing. And so where in G do we talk about ensuring that criminals are the focus of this? Like, they're not going to, so you're going to make all these, changes to definitions in 84.1, and we're going to try and add parts to firearm, to prohibition orders, and we're going to, update the definition of a prohibited firearm by taking out or. We're talking about, including prohibited firearms that have a muzzle energy exceeding 1,000 joules, which is like the big game hunters that go to Africa. We're going to, all the sort of stuff that we're talking about, a bore diameter greater than 20 mils. Where's the evidence to say that these firearms, what's happening right here in this list of firearms, and and everything about this in Section G here, it actually improves public safety? Have you found, like, you've been asked to make this legislation, and obviously it's based on something, some evidence somewhere that says we have a problem in this country that we have to identify these firearms because they are a danger to the public. Can you tell us what evidence that's there to support this legislation, please?
The definition was based on a policy decision that was made at the political level?
Right. So it's a Liberal policy that says we want to get rid of firearms, we want to attack legal firearm owners, so this is what we're going to do, arbitrarily. I feel sorry for you guys. I really do. You've been put in this tough spot. No, seriously, you've been put in a very, very difficult spot to do the will of the masters who suggest that we're doing all this fancy stuff for public safety, and they've done diddly squat for public safety. Diddly squat. I'm embarrassed for them. Embarrassed. And they should be embarrassed themselves. Mr. Chang, I have all due respect for you. This is not an amendment that's going to do anything for public safety. Nothing. Nothing whatsoever. And all the firearms that are listed here, as Ms. Dancho asked, I would really like to know, as she asked, and I would commit that you guys do that, if you're able to provide this committee with the list of firearms that is is listed in the schedule, that fit the definition under G, that says it's a semi-automatic rifle or a shotgun, because that applies to either one, and it has the capacity or the ability to accept a magazine that could accept a magazine that has greater than 5 rounds in it, 5 cartridges, because that would include many of them. And the fact that we already know that for most of this, if you have a magazine that exceeds the capacity with which it's legal, it's already a prohibited device in this country as it is. And yet we're going to make something more illegal because the criminals are going to be, very, very concerned about following, to make sure that they don't have a firearm that has, capable of having, a magazine that can take bigger than 5. Now, so do you have a list, and how many of those on this list, give me a number. Like we'll want the whole number, the whole volume of the voluminous models and makes of all of them that fit G specifically. Can you provide those for us?
So to answer the member's question.
I can't hear you, sorry.
Sorry, is this loud? Is this better?
It's not very loud, but.
To answer the committee member's question, we do not have a list with us of firearms. What I can speak to is what this motion does before you, and what this motion does before you is it amends the definition of prohibited firearm to add what are currently in the classification regulations and bringing them in. And, sorry, go ahead. It's just the definition. It's the definition. So the definition includes G, which is a definition of, it's an evergreen definition. But I do not have the list. We do not have the list with us. I understand that there are other motions that might be brought before the committee that.
Okay,
but we don't have that with us.
With the chair's indulgence, I certainly would ask that if you have that list and you can prepare it and provide it to the committee at your earliest convenience, that would be awesome. I appreciate the fact that G in all of these make adjustments to 84(1) of the code, of the criminal code. I get it, but then they become a prohibited weapon. That becomes a prohibited weapon. Right? So in G, you're defining what G stands for under prohibited firearm. 1.2, E, F, and G, and H are all going to be amended, right?
That is
correct. And with that amendment, you've just made what I've talked about for the last 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever, prohibited firearms. They're prohibited weapons now. And I hate to use the weapon because they're not a weapon, they're a firearm. And so they're not just a definition. The impact of what you're doing is significant right across the whole firearm industry, across the entire Canadian landscape that people use for hunting and protection from livestock and things like that on farms and ranches across this country. It does absolutely nothing for public safety, as I said, but it prohibits thousands and upon tens of thousands of firearms in this country owned by millions of Canadians and different models of firearms. And so that's where, at this point in time, I would really like to see that particular section or that particular list, of what it is that we're actually talking about. And I see here, we're changing the bore diameter. Now, can you tell me on 2.1 that you're after on definition of prohibited in subsection 1, bore diameter is, and you're describing what it is, but you're talking about making the bore diameter 20 mils or greater would now be considered to be a prohibited firearm. Is that what you're proposing?
Those firearms are currently already prohibited pursuant to the classification regulations. And this provision adds a definition of what's meant by bore diameter. And that's to add clarity. Because that issue did arise after the May 1st, 2020 OIC.
I was just going to say that they became prohibited again in the order in council of May 2020.
That's right.
Right, which was asinine to begin with. So again, I feel sorry for what you guys had to be put through to do this. I really do. I'm going to cede some of my time to Mr. Lloyd.
The chair will, in fact, recognize Mr. Lloyd and then Ms. Dancho after.
I thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. Some questions for our officials here. Given, was it you guys that drafted this amendment? Is that correct?
So the legislative drafters with the Department of Justice draft the legislation.
Okay.
And ourselves and our public safety, our CMP colleagues assist in giving direction with respect to the drafting.
And so you could say with confidence that you think that this kind of is formatted correctly and, it's correct in what it's talking about.
So the legislative drafters, they review the legislation for form and legality, and it's underneath their responsibilities in order to do that, but we do assist in providing instructions to Legislative Council.
Now, was it like the political staff or the MPs, were they providing the specific information about, the 20 millimeter, the semi-automatic, or were they just giving general instructions about general things, and then it was the department or the RCMP that provided the specifics on how that could be accomplished?
So the Department of Justice and Public Safety colleagues and RCMP assisted in the development of the policy decision, which is a decision by ministers.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that it was political, but it was also the department kind of weighing in on that. So, did the department consult? Was there any consultation on specifically the provisions regarding semi-automatic with detachable magazines, semi-automatic shotguns, semi-automatic rifles? Was there any consultations done on that?
So consultations, and my colleagues could jump in here, were undertaken by the Minister of Public Safety in, I believe, 2019, generally, on firearms, handguns, etc. With respect to the bill, we do not consult on the contents of a bill because of cabinet confidence and privilege.
So the consultation that led to these policies being drafted was taken place in 2019. Is that what you're saying?
So the large consultation that took place with the Minister of Public Safety, engaging with stakeholders, et cetera, took place in 2019, and I understand a report was prepared, and it was a very lengthy and comprehensive consultation in advance of Bill C-21, the original Bill C-21.
Now, given that the original C-21 that came to this committee didn't make any mention about banning semi-automatic shotguns and rifles, was there evidence? Was that talked about in the consultation as far as you know? Is that document publicly available for us to review?
I can't recall specifically if anything was relating to any kind of prohibition on firearms, but I can say that I believe the report is public. Perhaps my colleagues can confirm that that report is public from the Minister of Public Safety's consultations.
Yes, that report is available online.
Thank you. And as far as you know, I know Ms. Glushek, you said you sort of didn't know the specifics, but as far as any of the witnesses are aware, was there anything in that consultation document that talked about semi-automatic rifles and shotguns?
I would have to defer to my colleagues or the report itself because I am unaware.
Thank you for the question. I think I would have to defer to the report, and I do not have a copy of it in front of me.
So I guess I could summarize that you don't know if there was consultation specifically on this measure about semi-automatic rifles and shotguns. You can't provide evidence today. There might be evidence. You might provide it later. But as far as you know, there was no consultation directly on semi-automatic rifles and shotguns taking place in 2019. Okay, so that's interesting. Has there been any updated, we know there was a charter analysis for the original C-21. Has there been any charter analysis updated to reflect these amendments?
So yes, the charter statement was tabled on June 22nd, 2022. And as with any legislation or drafting of legislation, the Minister of Justice has a duty to ensure that it is compliant with the charter on amendments as well to the bill. So as with any other bill, amendments, motions, officials do an analysis as to whether it engages the charter, and we provide that advice to the Minister of Justice.
So has there been any updated charter analysis, or are you continuing to use the same charter analysis from June 22nd, which did not, take into account these new amendments that we're dealing with today?
So the charter statement is tabled at the beginning of when the bill is tabled.
Of course.
And currently, that is the only statement I believe that's tabled at the beginning of the bill.
So there has been no updated charter statement related to these new amendments. So we don't know if these new amendments actually, like, what their impact is on the charter.
So if you have a motion in mind that you wanted to bring forward in terms of impact, what I can say is some of the motions that have been put forward today could engage some charter provisions, for example, open court principle in terms of the red flag regime.
Now, we heard during committee study from a number of Indigenous witnesses who indicated that there had been no consultation with Indigenous communities on the original Bill C-21. Now, I would guess that if there has been no consultation on the original C-21, there probably hasn't been consultation on these amendments. Can you confirm whether or not this consultation has taken place on these amendments?
The department has not engaged in any consultations on these amendments.
Is there any concern that based upon the settled law in Canada, which is the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Independent Peoples that was passed in, I believe, the 42nd Parliament, that First Nations peoples have provided their free, prior, and informed consent to this legislation being passed?
So in terms of the UN Declaration on Indigenous Persons, every initiative that the government brings forward, whether it's to Cabinet, has to consider the UN Declaration and any intersection with the legislation. So that is done similar to a gender-based analysis that would have happened when we bring forward.
So you've decided for First Nations that they have been consulted without actually consulting them. Like your gender-based analysis, your First Nation consultation analysis, the department has said and the government has said that basically you've abided by UNDRIP because you've decided, without even asking First Nations whether they gave their free, prior, and informed consent for this legislation.
So again, what I can say is that when we are developing policy initiatives and they are protected by cabinet confidence or privilege, we cannot consult, but we do ensure that we take all the considerations into consideration. Different factors such as charter, UN declaration, impacts on Indigenous populations, LGBTQ, GBA, gender-based analysis. So we do various impact analysis on our initiatives. The government initiatives, sorry.
Thank you. I just think it will come as a big surprise to First Nation Indigenous peoples in this country that the government thinks that it can pass legislation and pass amendments to legislation in committee, and that the government will unilaterally say that we've abided by UNDRIP without even having any formal process to engage with First Nations in any way. I mean, I don't think that's what people meant by reconciliation in this country. I think what they wanted to see, and what the witnesses were talking about, was about the grassroots, and they said it wasn't even good enough if the government just talked to the national chief, because it was, one of the committee members said, we talked to the national chief, but Indigenous witnesses, and in my experience with Indigenous peoples in my community, is that you don't just go to the chief, you have to go to the elders, you have to bring it to the nation and the community, and it doesn't even appear like the government took any steps to even engage with the chiefs, with the elders, or with any members of the community to deal with this. And I would argue that this is violating not only the spirit, but the letter of the law in terms of UNDRIP and free, prior, and informed consent, also potentially touching on the Section 35 rights of Aboriginal peoples, which is ingrained in the Charter. When we're talking about semi-automatic rifles and shotguns, what assurances can you give that the Section 35 rights of Indigenous peoples will not be impacted by these amendments that relate to semi-automatic rifles and shotguns?
So a Section 35 analysis is usually undertaken by a court based on the totality of the circumstances, anyone who's claiming the right, the court who is determining the right, et cetera. It's not the department who would determine that. What I can say is that for example, in the red flag regime, in the limitation on access and the emergency weapons order prohibitions, there are provisions that allow for Indigenous sustenance hunting and anyone exercising a treaty right, as there is currently in the Criminal Code under Section 113. If there are any prohibitions, they can be lifted for such purposes. So some of the provisions we have considered in that vein. Anything to add, Paula? No. Thank you.
Is it the position of the government that in the drafting, because this is all speaks to the prior and informed consent, like, consent can't be given after the fact, and the word prior means beforehand. It's the position of the government or the department that it's not the responsibility of the government to seek out that free, prior, and informed consent. It's the job of the courts to sort it out after the fact.
I'm not sure that the officials are able to weigh in on the position of the government or something like this.
Not necessarily, the government as in like the partisan government, but the department, certainly, I think they could. Because they just stated that it's the job of the courts to decide a Section 35.
Well, I certainly think the officials know their boundaries, so,
Okay,
if they wish to answer within those boundaries, free.
We have no comment.
I'm going to keep going here. Has the department, in drafting the Justice Department, the RCMP, Public Safety, in drafting these amendments, considering that, like when I first saw this list of firearms from, I believe Mr. Chang or Mr. Nur Mohammed's amendment, it was about 310 pages, and the first thing that struck me was, this is the May 2020 Order in Council firearms, and they've just copy and pasted them over. But then on closer inspection, I discovered there was a number of new firearms that have been added. A significant number of potential new firearms that have been added. Has there been a financial analysis done by the department on the potential cost to the government of buying back these potentially newly prohibited firearms?
Pardon me, Mr. Lloyd, I don't think that's in the scope of this amendment. The actual buyback provisions aren't dealt with here. It's just a matter of definition. So I'm hoping we can bring it a little bit more back on this.
Mr. Chair, respectfully, I will try. I just think it's interesting because, yes, you're correct, I guess, that the buyback is different from this, but the consequence of this amendment will lead to an increased fine. Well, I guess I could ask this. If these newly prohibited firearms, if this amendment passes and these newly prohibited firearms are added to the list, would these firearms be included in the government buyback?
I suspect that's speculative, that it's a hypothetical.
I would agree that is.
We got to bear in mind that our officials are here to serve us all in a non-partisan way, and
Well, that's just a straight-up fact-based question. Would it be included or would it not be included?
well, it's also kind of not in scope of what we're dealing with Z4. So
You've got like 150 pages of now prohibited firearms on here. That's not in scope? Are you kidding me?
that's a whole different amendment.
Point of order,
Obviously.
Mr. Chair. I just want to confirm your, but I'm doing a point of order.
I'm not done.
Oh. Okay. I just want to confirm you're saying that him asking if people whose weapons will now become prohibited, hundreds of thousands of weapons, regular people, firearms will be prohibited. He's just, are you not asking if they will not be included in the confiscation regime or the so-called buyback? That's not in order. We can't know that information before we vote on this if people are going to be financially compensated. I'm just being clear that that's what you're saying.
I'm just saying that this is about a definition of what prohibited weapons are.
But once it becomes prohibited, people aren't allowed to own them. And there's likely millions of these
Well,
firearms.
the whole matter of the buyback
So-
and how that is managed is a whole different subject. I'm just trying to keep us on
No,
focus
Mr.
on
Chair,
this
sorry, point of
particular
order. This is being
amendment.
brought in by your government. Section 1.2 E and F directly related to the buyback. It takes, or the OIC in essence, it takes the OIC and puts it into legislation, or part of it anyway. So it's not us that's brought the OIC conversation into this, it's what's in this amendment. And it stands to reason, Mr. Chair, on my point of order, that we should be within our rights to know, or to ask and to know if the semi-automatic hunting rifles and shotguns that are going to be banned in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if those people are going to be compensated. I think that's a legitimate question. If they cannot answer it, then Liberal members on this committee should have that information. This is impacting hundreds of thousands of people with very expensive tools that they use on their day-to-day basis. So
I'm just saying the compensation regime, however that unrolls, is not the subject of this particular
Point of order,
amendment.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Nur Mohammed on a point of order.
Given that I have nowhere, to Ms. Dancho's point, I think, given that there is nowhere in this document that speaks to a buyback of any kind, I mean, I would agree with you. I think it seems that it would be out of order. But just for clarification, if Ms. Dancho wanted to propose a buyback, I'm sure she could propose such an amendment, correct?
Yeah, that would be a charge on the Treasury. Anyway, thank you for your points of order, and Mr. Lloyd, carry on, please.
Thank you. I would argue that, under subsection I, a firearm listed in the schedule to this part, and the schedules that were included are that massive list of firearms. So I would argue it is in the scope of this amendment because it's referring to a schedule that is referenced. So I guess, a bit of interesting thing about me. I used to do historical reenacting. And I know we have had, I know I'm a bit of a nerd, history nerd, but we have had a number of witnesses from that community that have expressed a deep concern that they're, I see in the definition, so what can you tell us what the definition of an antique firearm is? You're Googling pictures of me, aren't you, Talib? Oh.
I can answer that for you. The definition of an antique firearm is set out in section 84.1, and oh my gosh, sorry, I have old eyes. An antique firearm is any firearm manufactured like my eyes. An antique firearm is any firearm manufactured before 1898 that was designed to discharge. That was not designed to discharge. That was not designed to discharge rimfire or centerfire ammunition, and that has not been redesigned to discharge such ammunition, or then any firearm that is prescribed to be an antique firearm.
Thank you. And so I just wanted some clarification on that. Does that mean that the firearm had to have been created before 1898, or could a recreation of that, because we know like a firearm before 1898 probably would have fallen apart, from misuse. If somebody were to recreate a firearm that had been designed before 1898 with no modifications, would that be considered an antique firearm or not?
Well, the definition says manufactured before, and so...
So presumably if somebody made like a musket or a pistol or a cannon that was like from from a design from the 17th century, that would be considered a firearm, even though it functionally is the exact same as a firearm constructed before 1898.
Yeah, there's a legal distinction between a firearm that is designed to be a certain thing or one that is manufactured. And we would just take the plain meaning of manufactured, which is that it was made before 1898.
Okay, so you've clarified for me that a pistol or a musket that was manufactured after 1898 is considered a firearm.
Yes, but let me just double check.
We're learning so much today. Yeah.
There is, my colleague just pointed out to me that there is one exception, which could be if the remanufactured antique firearm, if it doesn't meet the threshold for a firearm, meaning that it can't cause serious bodily injury or death, then that would be a legal item. It would not be regulated, and it would be wouldn't fall within the definition of an antique firearm if it's not itself a firearm. And the definition of firearm is set out in Section 2.
Yeah, so a musket ball with black powder, definitely could kill people. It killed people for hundreds of years. So that would be considered, because that concerns me as a historical reenactor, or as somebody who has historically reenacted, is that, these firearms, functionally, you could put black powder in them, and at these historical reenactings, nobody's allowed to bring any musket balls or anything like that, so they would never put that in there. But if somebody were to put a musket ball in there, it actually could kill somebody, but under this legislation, those would now become prohibited. Were they already prohibited, or would they become prohibited under this legislation?
So there's nothing in the definition in Section 84 that would change the current law around antique firearm.
Okay. So the 10,000 joules, why was that threshold set? What is the purpose of 10,000 joules?
That was to address what we colloquially call as sniper rifles.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And that was from the May 1st, 2020 OIC. And they were listed also by make and model and by description.
Okay. And what about like cannons, for example?
So the cannons,
Yes.
that's the bore diameter, the 20 millimeter bore diameter descriptor.
Cannons obviously would have a much greater bore diameter than 20 millimeters.
Yeah, and they'd also be prohibited.
So, we have, some artillery groups and artillery enthusiasts, who do great work at, commemorative events in this country. They're concerned that under this legislation, that their, World War I, World War II, or even previous to that, artillery pieces that are used, for reenactments or celebrations would be covered under this legislation.
The 20 millimeters, yes. I mean, it's as stated in I can't speak to a specific firearm or specific cannon, but the law does state that anything that's in excess of, with a bore diameter of 20 millimeters or greater would be prohibited. So.
Well, I just don't think it was the intention of the government. I don't think, gangsters are roaming the streets with, World War II cannons. I think we could all agree on that. And it probably wasn't the intention of the government to include these historical pieces under legislation. But it seems like that's an unintended consequence. And based upon what you've said, that is a consequence of this.
Yes.
Okay. That's very concerning for historical reenactors. Let's see here. Another concern I have is that, can you tell us how many of these newly prohibited firearms, so that would be the firearms that were not included in the May 2020 OIC, but the new firearms that have been added in this amendment, how many of them are unrestricted, currently classified as an unrestricted firearm?
We don't have that data because in 2012, ending the Long Gun Registry Act.
Well, I'm not asking about how many are in circulation. I'm asking how many classes of those firearms are classified as, like you would be able to reference the firearms table
Right.
and look at, like for example, I know the SKS I think is a non-restricted rifle in this country. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us how many of the types of firearms that have been listed in this amendment are unrestricted and restricted.
I don't have that information with me, but we can undertake to provide the clerk with that information.
Okay. Yes, I do have a bit of concern.
Okay, sorry. I actually do have that information.
Wonderful.
It's about 40% are non-restricted.
And how many, 40%. So how many sorry, I was trying to do the math on
That's
this,
okay.
but, I was very busy reading all this. So not counting the May 2020 OIC firearms.
Okay.
And the newly added firearms on top of that with this amendment, how many firearms are we talking about approximately
So
that have been added through this
that have
amendment?
been added. I think there's approximately between 360 and 400 additional makes and models.
400, 360 to 400. So by your 40% amount, you're talking about 144, around there, between 144 to 200 or so unrestricted firearms.
And I'm just going to turn to my colleagues at the CFP. Yes? No? Okay. I'm going to ask Kelly. Our colleagues at the Canadian Firearms Program have undertaken to get back to you with with more precise information.
Thank you. I wrote all these questions for you,
okay.
and I'm drawing a bit of a blank on the next line of questioning that I had. So I might pass it on to one of my colleagues, but I do have some additional questions that I'll have at a later time. So I'll pass it on to.
Thank you, Mr. Dane. I'm sure you're going to be able to come up with something. Ms. Dancho?
I had it in my mind,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. I just want to clarify, you mentioned, ma'am, that as you estimated, 40% of unrestricted firearms would be considered under this new definition G. Is that what you were saying? 40%? And G being the semi-automatic hunting or shotguns and rifles as defined here. That's 40% of unrestricted?
Non-restricted, yes. 1 second.
So what was the, sorry.
So the 40%, number
Yeah.
applies to the new firearms that are listed in the schedule. In terms of what firearms would it be captured by G, we don't have that information available at the
Right.
moment, but that is a longer process, and and this provision would not be brought into force immediately on royal assent, it would be brought into force by an order in council.
Sorry, so this part of the bill, if this amendment makes it into Bill C-21 and it passes with this in there, you're saying even with royal assent, this doesn't come into force?
This would come into force by an order in council at a later date. It does not come into force on royal assent.
This specific part, or this whole amendment?
This whole amendment. Oh, H comes in within 30 days of royal assent, and H is, H would be any unlawfully manufactured firearms, so that's specifically ghost guns.
Okay, so you're saying, H,
Right.
Unlawfully manufactured firearms regardless of means or method of manufacture.
Right.
That part's being done through OIC?
No, that part would be done 30 days after royal assent.
Oh, but G, I'm sorry, I'm not following what you're saying.
Sorry.
Only H of the definition comes into force 30 days following royal assent. It's the ghost gun provision. The rest come in by order in council.
Okay, so, all right, so if the bulk of this amendment and the bulk of what we're talking about for the last hour, as even when this passes, it's not coming into force at OIC, do you know why it's just not being done by OIC? Then why does it need to be put in this bill at all? If the government can just do it by OIC, I'm not understanding what the process
Sorry,
is.
I did make an error. Some of the provisions would come into force on royal assent because those are already prohibited. It's the codification of the existing list, so those would be royal assent. So I apologize to members, I did make an error. The H definition for the unlawful manufacturing will come into force 30 days following royal assent. And for flexibility, the remaining parts of the definition will come into force by OIC, and it allows for flexibility as to when the definition would come into force.
Can they not do that now by OIC? Why is it, so I'm
So-
not
so
understanding why it's needed now then.
The government has choices. It can be on royal assent, it can be 30 days, 60 days, 6 months, or on OIC, which is a time to be determined by the governor or council.
Okay, but what I'm asking then, Section G, or this amendment, aside from the parts that you're saying will come into force after 30 days, you're saying parts of it won't come into force and the OIC says so. So could that not be done through OIC? Could most of the bulk of this amendment, as we're talking about, could that not be done by OIC exclusively then? Does it need to be in this bill and then OIC? Or could it just be OIC without this bill?
So that's a decision to be made by, obviously, ministers in terms of...
But is it possible?
Is it possible to bring different parts in by different means? Yes, it's possible.
So it is possible to expand. The government could ban all semi-automatic weapons just through an OIC, not through this bill. Is that within the powers that they have?
So the government has the ability to prohibit firearms through two means. One is by prescription, so through the existing regulations. The second way is what's being done here today, which is through legislation by amending the criminal code.
Okay, so this isn't, I suppose, to you, but if this amendment does not pass, the government could still pass it through OIC. That's a correct statement. I know it's a political one, but it's factually correct, right?
Yes.
If we agree as a committee to go in, they can still do this, is what I'm asking. Understood. Thank you for that. And so just to be clear, with another thing that my colleague had asked you, you don't have a list of all the models of firearms that are currently legal in Canada that would now be prohibited under G, the semi-auto ban. You don't have that list yet, but you're working on it.
I think
We understand that there are other motions that will be, might be introduced
So you're saying
to
we
the
have to,
committee.
Mr. Chair, do we have to move a motion to compel them to bring a list of all the firearms that will be banned?
No, I believe that they're referring to the fact that on our list of things to do, there are other amendments coming forward.
What I'm asking is, what are you providing? I'm just confirming that you will be providing that list to committee.
We do not have a list. I believe the committee might be provided motions, perhaps. with
Okay.
a list.
I guess what I'm asking for is this is going to ban, I would say probably thousands of models, at least hundreds of models of perfectly legitimate hunting tools. And we would need a list to fully understand, so that people can understand if their firearms are now going to be prohibited. So what I'm asking is, are you capable of providing us an extensive list?
So we cannot provide you a list, no. As justice officials here at the table, what we can do is speak to the definition in front of us and the amendments that are occurring and that the government is putting forward in the revised definition of prohibited firearm. And in that definition, there is the ability for a list to be added to a schedule in Part 3.
Mr. Chair, could we take 2 or 3 minutes just to have a huddle?
Absolutely.
I can pick up after. I have more questions.
Pardon me?
May I pick up after then? 'Cause I have
Yes.
more questions.
So we'll suspend for a couple minutes, but before we suspend, I just want to note to the committee and everyone that we have a hard stop today at 6:15. And I would also like to take the opportunity to welcome Miss May to our august body and congratulate her on her leadership win, and congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm, of course, sorry, but I'm not here on my own volition. I'm here because of the motion this committee passed that requires me to be here and also reduces my rights to present amendments at report stage. So it's a small point, large to me, but perhaps the committee is unaware that I'm here because of a motion you passed. But thanks for the welcome.
I kind of understand that. We've been here before. So thank you all, and we will suspend for a few minutes at the call of the chair. Is resumed. Ms. Dancho, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, is this close enough to me? Okay. So perhaps the public safety folks can let us know what they've discovered with their chat, and I have several follow-up questions, so please, over to you.
All right, thank you. So what the government is proposing is, to codify as well as create an evergreen definition for prohibited firearms. So in I, the amendment that's proposed in I includes a schedule that would capture the list of firearms that, as we know it today, or as the government knows it today, that meet that definition. There is a possibility always, as the firearms reference table is continually updated, that there may be ones that have not been identified, but that will kind of catch up into that definition. What you look at in G is that evergreen definition, which is to prevent new entrants to the market of firearms that would meet that definition.
Sorry, can you repeat that last part? Sorry.
So
Just having a hard
G
time hearing
is
you.
intended as an evergreen definition that would prevent new entrants that have those characteristics from entering the market.
But it would also include existing ones that are in the market right now, in gun shops, in our homes.
So, and those are, as far as we know, as far as the government has done the work, is it has identified those in I, in the schedule that would be presented as a motion and as an amendment.
Okay, thank you very much. Because there is a schedule provided in another government amendment for this bill that's, I'm sure we will discuss at some point, that will be moved by them. But my understanding is that that list would be most of the OIC confiscation regime, buyback guns that was already made public. That was 2.5 years. It's been added to, but it was 2.5 years ago now. But this G goes far beyond what was on that list provided by the OIC 2.5 years ago. Is that not correct?
So if we look at what is in I, there's a few different portions. There's a codification of firearms that were prohibited, I believe, starting in the late 1970s all the way up to the 90s. There is the firearms that were included as part of the May 2020 OIC, as well as others that that meet this definition of the evergreen that are known today.
Understood, but we have not seen this schedule, I suppose, is what you're saying. But Mr. Chair, perhaps you can, I don't know if you can answer that, or this schedule exists that will include every firearm that is captured in the definition of G, provided in G. Is that correct? The schedule exists somewhere?
I would suggest member look at the package of amendments.
This is separate.
But, Mr. Chair, my understanding is the package of amendments has a lengthy, with hundreds of different firearm models, but those are the ones that were banned through the OIC. That is not an exhaustive list of everything that would be included because of G. Are you saying that schedule will be exhaustive?
So it captures, again, the three buckets. So the first bucket would be those that were prohibited in, I believe, again, starting from the late 1970s to the early 90s. The May 2020 OIC, and as
Point of
well
order, Chair.
those that are captured.
Sorry to interrupt. Point of order.
Mr. Moff on a point of order.
Just going back to the point of order I made before, we're jumping ahead on amendments, so we shouldn't be discussing amendments that we haven't actually moved yet. And I recognize that it can be challenging here, but I don't think we should be asking officials to comment on amendments that may or may not be coming in the future, Chair.
Point of order?
But,
oh, sorry. Point of order?
Yeah, go ahead.
Am I interrupting you? I sorry, I didn't want to interrupt
No,
you.
I'm done now.
I thought you were done.
Mr. Lloyd on a point of order. Same point of order.
Connected to this.
Mr. Chair, I would say submit that under Section I, a firearm listed in the schedule to this part, G46 is the schedule that is referenced in G4, so I would argue that it is part of G4, and so therefore it would be within to discuss that.
Is that the case?
I think there's a fine line. The reference to it is certainly here, but the amendment itself has not been moved, and it's privileged until it's moved, right? Well,
Okay, so, but Mr., okay, if I may continue?
And I understand the importance of it to you. You can certainly refer to it in your package of possible amendments. And I'll ask our law clerk, or pardon me? They want to talk about C-46. They can't do it yet, right? So in general, we know it's there, we know it, but we can't, I guess, speak to it really very specifically. So, yeah, so are you done your point of order? And was that a point of order? Yes. A same point of order? Similar, yeah. Not similar, because Ms. Dancho wants to carry on, and so.
Well, it's about, and I'm not going to interrupt your question because she'll have them, she'll continue on, I know, but it's about G46. And you know, the officials that are here make reference to it. Section I makes reference to it, as Mr. Lloyd has indicated. I have to submit that it's completely inappropriate that here we're talking hypotheticals right now because we can't mention, you know, G46 that has a significant list of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of firearms, and we simply want to know some answers to some questions. So I think it's most appropriate that section be brought forward, and we can identify some of those firearms.
The problem here, Mr. Motz, is that it's privileged until it's moved. So we can't talk about it in public because it hasn't been moved yet, right? We know about it all ourselves, whatever might be in there. We can speak in most general terms, but we really can't delve into it because it is privileged at this point. Ms. Dancho, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, but we've spent, half an hour trying to ask if we can get a list of all the things that are included so that we can make a fully informed decision, so that my colleagues in the bloc and the NDP can make a fully informed decision. And perhaps you can answer this, the law clerks can answer this for me. Could the government have provided that schedule as part of this amendment, or did they have to provide them as two separate amendments? Could they have provided them together?
The schedule has to be done at the end of the bill, and that's why it's presented at the end of the package, right? And that's just the way this stuff works.
Well, to make a fully informed decision and have a debate if we can't understand the full impact. I mean, but it's fairly obvious. I mean, I guess anyone who has any semi-automatic or almost any semi-automatic shotgun or rifle, that will now be added to prohibited. And I think sometimes folks forget, but there are 3 different classifications, and perhaps the folks here can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's unrestricted, and you need a possession and acquisition license, a PAL, to purchase and own. You need a PAL to own restricted firearms. If you want to own restricted firearms, you need an RPAL. And then prohibited ones, nobody can own them legally in any circumstance. People do own them, of course. We know criminal elements in this country use them all the time. But you're not legally allowed to own prohibited. You can own restricted if you have a restricted PAL, and you can own unrestricted if you have a basic PAL, basically, to say it bluntly. Is that correct?
Yes, there are 3 categories. A lot of people say unrestricted is actually non-restricted.
Pardon me.
That's
Thank you very much.
Fine. And a non-restricted firearm is a firearm that is neither restricted nor prohibited.
Right.
Restricted firearms do require an RPAL, which has additional course requirements and enhanced storage requirements. And then for prohibited firearms, there are exceptions under Section 12 of the Firearms Act.
They're rare.
I don't want to get out of my lane, but there are people who do possess some prohibited firearms.
Right.
But in general, individuals are not permitted to possess a prohibited firearm.
Thank you very much. Yes, so there's unrestricted, you get your PAL. With more licensing, as you said, you have to get your RPAL. There's also, I believe, more background checks, and also the police are aware of all the legally owned restricted weapons. Is that correct?
That's right.
Right. So any restricted weapon that's owned legally, police have that information of who owns them.
Restricted firearms
Right.
are registered with the Canadian Firearms
Right.
Program. Yes.
When unrestricted or not.
Non-restricted.
Or non-restricted, pardon me.
They're not registered.
Understood. And then we have prohibited.
Yes.
That except for a few circumstances, people are not allowed to own them, except for a few circumstances, as you've mentioned. So right now, though, it's correct to say that there are many, many, many semi-automatic shotguns and rifles that are non-restricted. So they're the lowest category of restriction. They're non-restricted. Then we have restricted and prohibited. G takes non-restricted firearms, a huge group of them, and jumps them not to restricted, which has more oversight with police. Police are supposed to know where they all are, the legally owned ones, but puts them in the prohibited category. Am I understanding that correctly? With this definition of semi-automatic rifles and shotguns, it will move many firearms that are non-restricted to prohibited. Correct?
It will also move, yes, and it will also move some rifles and shotguns that are restricted to the prohibited category.
Some of them.
But yes,
But it's correct to say it's jumping from
That's
non-restricted all the way to prohibited.
that's correct.
Okay, and so if, let's say I own one of these, it's an non-restricted, model of a semi-automatic shotgun for bird hunting. And this passes, now it is a prohibited, correct? So my understanding, though, with the OIC and the confiscation regime that ensued, or the buyback, the government told the public, if you own these, you're going to be compensated for them. It took them a couple of years to come up with the list, but we're going to pay you to get them to buy them off of you. If I have a semi-automatic rifle or shotgun, I mean, again, we can't talk about what's in Schedule 1, but if it's not on that schedule, I'm not going to get paid for that. It's just illegal. Is that correct? I'm not allowed to own it anymore, and I'm not going to get any compensation for it.
I can't speak to any
can't speak to
government decision with respect to compensation.
But just as of this, because we're not aware of any other amendment that would bring in a buyback. My colleague from the Liberals asked us if we would move that motion. We can't because it's financial. So I guess what I'm asking is, this amendment, as we see it, logistically, does not provide compensation if that firearm is not included in the schedule. Is that correct?
As I mentioned before, we have no information that we can share with respect to compensation. It's
Okay.
outside of what is before us.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, I suppose from what I'm seeing is there is no, and it was mentioned, I think in good faith from a Liberal member, that if we want to institute a so-called buyback or confiscation regime, where the Liberal government would provide money for me if I had a semi-automatic shotgun that fell under this definition, which is nearly all, there is nothing in here to say it's just going to be prohibited is what I'm seeing. So unlike the OIC, which was tough enough for people because it was 1,500 models, several 100,000, if not a million of these 1,500 models were owned in this country lawfully and legally. But at least they were given dignity of saying, the government was like, well, we're going to pay you for them. We're going to take them from you. There's nothing you can do about it, but we're going to pay you for them. What I'm seeing here is there is no guarantee of that. And again, firearms are very expensive. They're thousands of dollars, $600 maybe for an entry-level one. So I'm not seeing, and I'm not hearing any communication from Liberal members that hunters who own semi-automatic shotguns for bird hunting, they're just going to be illegal, and there's nothing they can do about it, and they're not going to get an ounce of compensation. I welcome if there's any intervention from Liberal members to contradict this, but what I'm understanding is there's hundreds of thousands of hunters are going to have very expensive tools that they use with not even a modicum of dignity provided to them, that the Liberal government is going to provide them financial compensation, unlike what they did with the OIC so-called buyback, where at least they were saying, don't worry, we're going to pay you. Maybe not what they're worth, but we'll pay you something. I'm not seeing that at all here. And some of these are antique, they're heirlooms. Again, I've mentioned this in the House, but people pass these down for generations. they're graduation gifts. They're huge sources of pride for many in the rural community, in the hunting community. I'll just wrap up because I know we're out of time. But I'm deeply concerned, and perhaps Liberal members could bring back some information next time, next meeting to, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there is going to be compensation for the millions of firearms that are going to be prohibited now for those people. I think that they at least deserve that. They don't deserve any of this, frankly, but I'm not clear if hundreds of thousands of hunters are going to be compensated for things that they have used for years that will now all of a sudden be completely illegal. So I'd like an answer on that, Mr. Chair, when we come back, and I will be following up. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the committee. We have a hard stop at this point. So I would like to thank the interpreters, of course, who put up with all of our efforts, and certainly for the officials and legislative clerks and analysts for being here every day. Thank you, and so we will start again on Thursday morning at 11 o'clock, and we are adjourned.